Yeah.
Hey, we are live. Welcome to this semi-informal Creality live stream. We have Richard Cleveland from the First Layer here.
Good
We have
evening.
we have Ben from Creality,
Hi, everybody.
and so we're looking for help from the audience for stuff that you might want to talk about. Please do not grill us on all the 6 new printers that were released from Creality. There's potential builds coming out in the near future. We can try and talk about it a little bit, but I got to see the announcement at the same time as you did, even though I'm sort of an insider. So I'm still wrapping my head around all the different things that came out. And I don't know, does this model have that motherboard, or is it a 32-bit or an 8-bit? I just don't have that level of knowledge. So we'll all get to find out about it as we go forward here in the future. So part of the reason I wanted to bring Richard on is get him more exposure to the Creality community. He's been doing some really good work in Canada. His YouTube channel is got really good content in it, and I also wanted to get to know him better. We've met through other venues on the site or whatever, but I've enjoyed talking with him and getting to know him. One of the things we talked about in the green room, and that will probably be part of the topic for today, is my help guide, and he is also doing teaching classes on building printers through his business, or with an alliance with the business. And I'm probably going to go over what I think are the most important parts of my guide as part of our discussion for today, and you guys can follow along. Oh, crap! Sorry, I forgot to mute my phone. I'm a bad host. Anyhow, we're going to talk a little bit about the help guide. Ben, if you want to put up a link to the help guide, either at the Creality official site or the one that's at TH3D's knowledge base, whichever one's easier to get to for the people in the audience, so that they can reference it, that would be awesome.
Oh yeah, I put both. I put both here.
Okay, excellent.
I'll just let people know quickly that we've got the help guide on our Facebook group page, and it is also on the first page of our website, thefirstlayer.com. So you can grab it from either one of those as well.
All right. So if you want, Richard, we can get that posted up as well.
Sure.
Yeah. I post all 3 here so people could check out. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask a little bit about what your classes look like, sort of the duration, some of the things that you're teaching, some of the skills you're going through. I know that, or you'd mentioned that some of it's building their first printer as part of the class. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the class is called the Build and Learn, and we usually do it about every second month. So far this year, it's been every second month. And we start with the Ender 3 Pro. In the morning, we teach them how to build the Ender 3 Pro to a level where everything is tight, everything is square, and it's all ready to start a print. We start their first print, they all break for lunch, they come back, and we cover software in the afternoon and how the software relates to the hardware in which they are now going to be taking home with them. It's an all-day course. It's about 8 hours.
Excellent. And it says, how frequently do you offer those courses for those that might be close enough to sign up?
Locally, we've been doing them every 2 months this year because we've just had a huge demand for them. People really like doing them. Previous year, we did 3 of them, basically 1 in each quarter, and we were doing them to a much larger group. We were doing them to 10 people at a time. Now we've scaled it back to 4 people, 4 students at a time. So it's a little bit more personal. They can ask more personal questions, and they don't feel like their questions are going to get lost in the shuffle. What's the best slicer for Creality, guys? I can tell you straight up, the one that we use in our course is Cura.
Yeah, so I have some pretty good profiles out there for Cura, and it is a good slicer. I did turn to the dark side. I have Simplified 3D. I bought a licensed copy because I have a part that I'm producing for fishing. And to be quite honest with you, I paid for the trial period. It was producing better quality parts day in, day out for those. So the $150 price tag was worth doing. Here in a little bit, I might take a little trip down the path and update my profiles to take advantage of some of the new 4.5 add-ons and stuff. But
well, I got to tell you, from my personal experience, I started with Cura. I had it for 2 weeks on my very first printer. It drove me nuts. So I went out and bought Simplify 3D. I got great prints from Simplify 3D. I got great prints from it when I moved into Creality products as well. Then as Cura started to catch up, and I started to see some of the changes that were being made in the software, it's one that I actually use more often than I use Simplify 3D now, just because the profile, especially for Creality products right now, is just so good right out of the box. There's no tweaking that you have to do. You can just go to it, and it's easy to teach.
Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't totally, kicked Cura to the curb. Like the other day, I sliced something for somebody else that needed help with something, and I fired up Cura and did it or whatever. And I'm not done with Cura. I just haven't spent a lot of time with it recently. And it's a robust device. It just, at some point, I hope that they finish doing their add-ons and then go into refinement, because they've got a lot of things in there that if you pair them with the wrong other features, it causes problems. And that's the real difference in the profiles right now, is knowing having the experiences of which things don't work well together, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, with like I said, with the stock profiles that they have now in Cura, you really can't go wrong. So long as you haven't messed with your machine too much, you've put it together. And the one thing I stress to all of my students and anybody that's looking to buy a new printer is spend some time with that printer, learn it first before you decide what needs upgrading. Don't listen to the internet. Don't listen to my program. Go ahead and just play with the printer for a few months, print as much stuff as you can. And by the time that you've gotten to the point where you can level the bed by yourself and you're printing successfully, chances are you aren't going to want to do too many upgrades.
All right. So I got a question from Ricky asking about, is it safe to print over 30 hours? Is there any safeguards? So you got to realize you are using a thing that has a hot end that's at 200-ish degrees Celsius, which is close to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I always forget the conversion, but it's hot. It's a fire hazard, even with the software properly configured with the thermal runaway protection. That being said, I think we've got to the point now where all of the new production Creality printers and most of the other manufacturers have got on board, and they have what they call thermal runaway protection. What that does is it says if it's telling the heater to heat and it can't see a change in the appropriate amount of time, it shuts it down to potentially stop a fire. That being said, there's things that can happen outside of that little microcosm that we can correct for, that it's a fire danger. So be smart about your setup. Don't have it on a plastic table directly. At least have something that will stop the underneath from catching fire. And don't have it like next to upholstery drapes or another flammable type item. That being said, I run my printers without losing any sleep for up to a week at a time, literally in one print. Some people are like, you print for a whole week? I mean, you got to have some big prints to do it. But yeah. So yes, they have protections. In the end, you need to protect yourself. There are some systems where you can set up a fire alarm that will actually shut the power off to the machine if it trips. That is one way to go. And there's a bunch of other things. If you do some digging in the groups, there's chemical fire things you can sort of place at the top of the printer that if the fire were to start, it'll release and then extinguish it. There's options.
You're talking about 1 week prints. This one right here that I've been working on painting, this was done on the Cr-10 S and took roughly about 2 weeks to do both pieces.
Yeah. So somebody's asking about the Ender 3 V2 has it. Will it have it? It should. If we haven't got that straightened out, in the programming section we'll have to break some knuckles, but I would anticipate that it'll have it set up. All right. So there was another question I was going to talk about, or another thing. Oh, so earlier you mentioned about keeping it simple when they start. I totally agree with that, Richard. There are two things that I like to bring up that some people would call mods, I guess, but two things that can help people right away at the build process or shortly thereafter that I encourage. And so I'm going to mention those, and we'll talk more about them later. One is what I call my bed stabilization mod. So I encourage people to get 4 standard 4mm nuts. And when you're setting your printer up, you take the bed off, the springs off, you run that nut up on the back side of the board, and it will hold the screw from spinning, but it also holds it perpendicular to the bed. And what that does is stop trampoline movement within the bed if the springs aren't as tight or other things are influencing the printer. So that gives you a little bit more stability to get that first layer dialed in. And then the other thing is my hot end fix, because the fittings that they ship with aren't always the greatest, and the PTFE slips in the fitting, you get a little void in your hot end, and now it's under extruding or not extruding at all and clicking, and people are like, I don't know what to do. And my hot end fix stops that back pressure problem. So I end up recommending that a lot.
Yeah, I think the idea of putting those nuts at the very bottom of the heated bed to hold those screws perpendicular is a great idea, because as we all know, those springs are going to move back and forth. That nut also keeps them locked in place at the very bottom of the heated bed as well.
Yeah. Yep. And then the only other one is, and it's included in my, if you go to Edgertech, he has my advanced assembly guide. That basically follows through all the tenets of my help guide, but in video form and in an assembly. And that's my X-gantry rework. So the thing that I do differently there, because like Tomb the 3D Horrors has a really great assembly video, and the one thing that he has them do that mine differs from, and the reason that I end up having to have people that do my method, is he has, as part of the process, he has the vertical extrusions to be made perfectly parallel by putting the horizontal extrusion in front of it and making them perfectly square to each other. And there's a reason why you don't want to do that, and I'm going to illustrate now. So we've got imperfect assemblies made in China at a cost that you're getting a 3D printer, a nice one, in the $200 to $300 price range, right? Thomas, I'm online. Would you mind? Just 1 second. So what happens is you've got multiple POM wheels into V grooves guiding that X gantry as it moves up and down. It would be nice to say that those things were all perfectly punched, hole punched, and assembled together and come together square, so the PLM wheel in a 45 degree is going to be perfectly in line on both carriages to both sides. In reality, it doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. So what the X gantry rework that I do is the brass tacks of it is I have you assemble both halves and individually adjust their tension to the rails, because some of them, they have you do the eccentrics with them both assembled and together, and that can put more stress in there than you want. So both sides get individual eccentric adjustment. But the real big thing is while they're still separated, I have you put them on the rails. You just lightly loosen the underneath screws to the vertical extrusions, and you bring them together so that the plane of the face of the one trolley and that rod coming from the other side are just barely touching. That means that you have no twisting forces being applied to the POM wheels and to those V grooves as it goes up and down. So the best thing I can use to describe why that makes a kinematic effect, some people will be like, oh, it's not a big deal, right? If you've ever been in the Midwest or driven in the snow or whatever, get in a rut and then try and drive out of the rut. You'll sort of
welcome to Canada.
Trying to get out of it, right? But it's going to hold you in the rut. Well, those wheels are stuck in the rut, but if it can try and walk out if the alignment isn't great. So that's what that process does.
Well, two of the things that I do now, especially for our students, is I will make blocks that are about, good 5.5 to 6 inches tall. And I also make a little carpenter square, which I print, and that helps for the alignment of all the parts as they're going together. And then what we'll do before we put that whole X gantry on, especially the Ender 3, is I have them unload the eccentric wheels by turning the eccentric spacer. I have them unload those wheels. We drop that on, we get it sitting nice and square first, then we tighten up the wheels so everything is still sitting square. Last thing we do is we drop in that threaded rod, and it'll stay square as long as they keep everything nice and tight and tidy.
Yeah. So one other thing I missed because I had family distractions. Sorry to everybody about that, but my family doesn't really care about this so much. So so we got the twisting forces unloaded and whatever, and we want it parallel, right? Horizontal to the deck, to the frame, so that the springs are evenly loaded down below and everything. And that's the other part that I do is with it only mounted to the left side tram, we set that parallel to the deck without the other trolley on. But anyhow, what that does is the right side trolley is not there to do anything other than to keep that end of the bar from moving. It does no weight support or anything. It's just an end guide, because like on the Ender 2, it can move forward and backwards and you get a defect in the part. And that's why they made the Ender 3. You add another support axis and you can stabilize it, right? So the tidbit to take away from that, and I don't know if you know this, Richard, or not, but I found that their machining process of those plates that make the left side trolley are such that right where that extrusion mounts to it, they're right next to each other. If you loosen those two little screws up that allow that to move like this, if you get them perfectly in line with each other and then tighten it, probably 9 out of 10 times when you put that together and have the eccentrics proper, it'll be level. It's really hard to explain in videos or print media or whatever, but if you can get those in line, then you're not dealing with it partially tightened and putting it on there and trying to get it level and then bring it off and then tighten the screws, and because you can only get at the screws from the back side, right? You can't get at them while it's on the machine. So that's a little tidbit for people to know that might just hear the video and not even follow the guide or whatever.
Without contradicting what you just said, one of the things that I do is I make sure that the top plane of where it sticks out, you know how it comes down and sticks out? That top plane it's level with the top of the extrusion, that 2020 piece of extrusion. It's going to be square every time.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to communicate. Yeah. That's what I want. I want those two things perfectly in line with each other. Yeah. So
that's what we do in our class.
You figure that out over time in your class or whatever. It's part of the guide or whatever. But
I can't tell you how many Ender 3s I've built over the last 3 years.
Yeah. All right. I haven't been particularly looking for questions. Is there any good ones that we can grab here real quick? I'm not seeing a ton. Ben, if you happen to see a question that we should be looking at or whatever, either put it in the private chat or just repost it as a question so it'll show up in the feed again if you would.
Okay. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the biggest things. If you get those things done at assembly, you're going to get there. Once in a blue moon, you'll get an extrusion that's miscut on the end, and we don't get a lot of them. Creality's really done a good job of squaring their ends.
I'll agree.
They figured that out early on, that they had to be pretty well cut and whatnot. And I used to have to do a lot with what we called the Z binding. So that where the T-nut attaches to the lead screw, that bracket would be like 5 degrees off plane from perpendicular to the deck. And if you tighten the two screws to the brass nut completely, it was just enough to create a binding as you got close to the stepper, and it would sort of cause hiccups as you're coming off of the bed. And I haven't noticed, from what I can tell, it's not a problem. I had talked to Ben about manufacturer, and I don't see it pop up very, very often. I think once in a while there's some old stock printers that show up and have it. but I think the new ones don't have it. But that being said, I don't know where you're at, and you can tell me. I still, no matter what the alignment and everything is I want 1 to 2 turns loose on that nut, so that if there is any angular problems with the lead screw or something got on it or whatever, it's not going to deflect and cause problems to the carriage that it's attached to.
I'll agree with you on that. The one thing that I do is I just give them a half a turn back, just so there's enough of space there for that actual lead screw nut to move. Once you've done that, you know, I've seen so many people that have tried to shim the actual motor and the mount. If you've done it right, you will never, ever have to use a shim. And in every one that I've ever built, I've never had to use a shim once.
Yeah, I have an early model Ender 3 that I have a shim in because I didn't take there's a way to actually bend that bracket back so you don't have to do it. But because I'd already shimmed it and I just didn't want to reel it, I just leave it there or whatever. But when that bracket is bent and the T-nut's tight, it'll create enough misalignment that if you don't put that shim in there, you can't correct it even with leaving the nuts loose or whatever. But YouTube not playing. That would be a YouTube problem, I guess. I don't know.
Probably a streaming issue to YouTube.
Yeah. So then it comes down to, it seems like we're focusing on first-time setups, right? So let's sort of keep with that a little bit. So then becomes the users learning how to level the bed, right? So I grew up as a machinist doing paper touch-offs where I got a spinning tool that's spinning at 1,000 RPMs and touching it to paper. So I got really good at doing it. But not everybody has that skill, right?
Right.
So I don't know what you suggest. I personally have gotten to the point where I actually prefer that they really start out with one of the G-code assisted bed leveling things. Some of the firmwares have it, but you can get G-code from Thingiverse. I provide links in the guide, and it basically will lift, move, and come down to position. So if it's off, it'll just cause the bed to deflect, but you can get it tuned without putting a big old drag mark across your bed trying to get it leveled, you know?
Well, I'll tell you, the way that I approach bed leveling is, you know, if people do the square, like everybody does and everybody's taught to do, they're going to chase level all the way around. And really what you're doing is you're tramming that tool head to the bed. You're not really leveling the bed.
Yeah.
So the approach that I take, because it's on that center style or that center piece of extrusion, it's like a seesaw. So what you want to do is when you start at the bottom corner, the bottom left corner, you're going to go across to the upper right corner, then down to the bottom right corner, and then across to the upper left corner, and then finally end up back at the bottom left corner. If you do that crisscross, I find that you only have to do it once or twice. And you'll be dialed in. You'll be able to start your print, no problem. This is the way that I teach all of my students and anybody that's buying a new Creality product. This is the way that I teach them to do it. And they all seem to get it right quickly.
Yeah, and I can't remember if I got it fully updated in my guide, but a common problem, get their sensor height or the trigger height wrong in relationship between the nozzle and the bed. So one of the things that I like to do is I tell them to tighten the bed springs all the way down. I want to take the back left spring. That's the one that has the strain guard on it and the most restriction to its space. So I back off 2 full turns. It says two turns or 2 full turns. I can't remember, but that's 720 degrees for the people that want to get a literal with it or whatever, right? So if you back it off 2 full turns, then you move the head, the nozzle back there and touch it to paper right above that screw. You can loosen the end stop, bring it up till it clicks, and then set the rest of the bed to that level, and it's going to be well within the adjustment range. Even if your horizontal gantry is off a little bit, you're going to have the most adjustment. You're going to be at about the perfect spring rate tension, and it's all going to work together, right? And you might have to cut the little nib off of the tab or whatever that they put on there to do that. But But that's one of my procedures, and I'm gonna, in my next edition of the guide, because I have an update coming. I'll try and make that more clear. But that's a very common thing that I see day in and day out as I help in the Facebook groups.
Yeah, I think you've hit kind of the nail on the head. But I find that, you know, if you've done that crisscross pattern, cutting that little nub off is absolutely not necessary. And it, like I said, in all the ones that I've built since the Creality Ender 3 has been out, I've never had to do that, not to any of them. And once I developed that nice little crisscross method, and it works, it really does work. And it's going to be included in an online course that I'm working on now, because we're not going to, because of the current state of the world,
you can't even do in-persons, right?
I can't do courses anymore live. So I am working on an online course that will explain that procedure that I do, and on bed leveling. And like I said, if you do it twice, it'll be perfect for 10, 20 prints until you've rocked that bed too much and you've moved those springs. But, you know, by putting those nuts on the bottom of the build plate on the screws, that should take care of that, and you shouldn't have any issues.
All right. So there was a question that Matt put up, and he's been a sort of a client of mine, if you will, for a while. He wanted to know your thoughts on the screws and the heat transfer in the hot end. So Matt, we talked about this pre-show. I'm going to speak for Richard. So
we both have different opinions.
We agreed that we have different opinions. They're fine to leave the screws in there. He has not noticed that they transfer heat. I don't like them, but I'm not going to publicly tell people to take them out. That's sort of where we're at. So can they cause heat creep? Nobody's proven it either way. I've got a flare gun that I'm going to be using to test some more on it. But for right now, the manufacturer provides them with them in, and we have no proof of heat creep there. So that's the answer. There's no proven heat creep.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I don't think there's any heat creep issues from those screws. They're, in my opinion, they're there for a reason. They're there to hold everything nice and square. If they're over tightened, what you're going to find is that you're going to bend that heat break, because the break inside there is very thin walled. And that's where your biggest problem of heat transfer is coming from. So as the heat climbs up that heat break, it expands, but the tube that's inside it does not.
Right. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question well enough, Matt. So he leaves them in. That's
I leave them in. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just had another thought that was crossing my brain on another question that came up. So somebody was asking about they got the silent board and they wanted to add smoothers to it. So do not. The only place that, I don't know. So this brings up another thing, and I don't want to get too far off the beaten path because we're on the sort of the new user board, but it brings up a point. Some of the new 32-bit boards are pushing, even with silent steppers, they're driving accurately enough that you see the STL faceting more in your prints, right? And you got guys putting on these aftermarket boards are like, it's supposed to be better. Well, the 8-bit boards that we're using right now, they're not as clean in their execution of the commands, and that makes for smoother part finishes. You may find that when you get that 32-bit board, it's not an improvement in finish quality, especially in curved surfaces. So just understand that.
I think if you're going to upgrade to any kind of board, to be perfectly honest with you, if you're going to upgrade to any kind of board and you want silent, replace it with a factory built board. To me, that's the best result. I've done upgrades with both of the aftermarket 32-bit boards and the Creality silent board. And I got to tell you, for what the Creality silent board is, it works just fine.
Yeah. So it's not required. I will tell you that if you're going to do the silent board and you want to have longevity, because it's right at the threshold for the steppers heat dissipation for the amount of copper that's on it, if you can get extra fan blowing across there, it's not going to hurt you for longevity. We don't have a known issue, but more cooling never hurts when it comes to electronics. So let's leave it at that. Okay, so we were doing the bed leveling thing. Oh, so then we get into with the bed leveling. We talked about the height. Then basically understanding what a first layer should look like, right? That's another skill that you're developing as you become your first time printer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I have referenced a chart or whatever in mind. It basically shows the different amounts of plastic being extruded. You go from so let JC Productions. I saw your questions and I'll get to it in a minute. Sorry. You as Maurice or Maurice on YouTube says, you want it to feel like you got a piece of fishing line on your bed, right? So it's going to be proud, but it's not going to be smashed, because if you smash it too much, you get cupping. And then if it's not tight enough, then it's not going to stick to the bed. If it's not sticking to the bed, you're definitely not close enough yet. And that's the really hard part for people to not understand or whatever. But there's lots of good pictures out there. Honestly, with a decent piece of sheet stock, if you go till it's just barely dragging on it, you're going to be within a quarter turn of the wheel of that perfect spot, and just start it printing and look at what's happening. And you can do that last quarter turn fine tuning. Some people think once you do the paper choke chop, it's supposed to be miraculously perfect. You might have to do a little bit of adjustment, you know.
I find that by using a Post-it note, which is what I use all the time when I do the four corner leveling, I find that as soon as you get just that little bit of drag on each of the 4 points, you're set. You may have to, you're right, you may have to do a fine little adjustment right at the very end when you first start to lay down that purge line. But yeah, you're right in that ballpark with, and you don't want to crush it. You want to be able to move that paper, but you want to feel that drag of the nozzle on that paper.
Right. And I think what gets lost in translation on paper, and even in some of the videos, is they think that once you do the paper leveling, it's don't touch it anymore, right? You can do those little fine tunes. Let's say, you know, to put a number on it, you don't want to move more than 3/8 of a turn from wherever you got on paper, as long as you got a decent drag on it, right? And the other part about that is it needs to be hot, right? These people are
absolutely.
The depth of the nozzle. If it's not hot, you can do that paper leveling, but if there's a blob of plastic on there, you're not even going to be in the same neighborhood once it goes, right? So always do the paper touch off hot. It's just part of the program, right? We're not like a guide or whatever, but you know, people are going to experience this and they might pick up something from it, right?
I like the question that was just there from Brian Baker, asking us about bed adhesions, our favorite bed adhesions, and why they are what they are. I got to tell you, my two favorites, and I've tried everything, are just a plain piece of borosilicate glass and glue stick. That's my favorites. And I'll tell you why, because it works every time for me.
Okay.
You know, I've tried the build tack. I've tried, you know, the
give me a second, Mike.
Yeah, I've tried all of the other build plate adhesive methods. And to be perfectly honest, I always go back to glass and glue stick. I replace all of my beds with glass, and more specifically, I like to replace them with mirror glass, because mirror glass is truly flat. And then I'll just use a purple glue stick. I'll heat up the bed. I'll put the glue stick on, let it go. That's mine.
Yeah. So for me personally, I have silicate glass. If I'm going to have one, it's either going to be silicate glass or it's going to be a flex sheet with PEI on it. I have about a 50-50 mix of those right now. I'm currently making those ear strap or ear reliever things. Right. It's faster for me to cycle the parts on the machine that has the flex plate, because I can put it on a cool surface. It cools off really quick, so I don't bend the plastic as I pop it, and that gives it that little edge up on the glass. If I could only ever have one glass, it'd be the silicate glass, right?
Yeah, me too.
If I only got one choice, that's it. PEI for convenience and speed of getting parts off is right there. I mean, they're right with each other. The magnetic build tack, it's okay, but there's not very many strong magnets out there for it. Like TH3D they now have a magnet that's not supposed to degauss up to 120 degrees. So you can actually get up into that the what do you call it, the degaussing range and still do ABS and whatever, right? And he's using it with his flex plates, but it can be used with a magnetic surface as well. But that's the only one I know of that's really going to work well above about 70 or 80 degrees.
I know Spool 3D has been experimenting with the same thing. I don't know if it's been fully released yet on their website here in Canada, but I know that they've been experimenting with the replacement bed for the Ender 3 with the higher temperature resistant magnets. I personally could care less about being able to snap my parts off. Once it cools, you take one of these things, and it just pops right off anyway. So that's the secret. You have to let your parts and your build plate cool before trying to take your parts off.
Okay, so JC Productions, I think you were the one that had the question about the visually impaired stuff. So would you please PM me? I don't have it committed to memory. I know that there's at least a person, if not a group, that's sort of dedicated towards the visual impaired that is doing work like that. I would imagine if they haven't already, somebody might be working on translating my guide into it. And if they haven't, I can try and sort of export the text so that somebody can use a converter to do that. There are some challenges there with not having vision that you as a community are going to have to work through, right? I would imagine if you shared STLs and were able to do basically the multi-pad bed leveling program where it creates pads at the end where you could pull the pad off and either measure it, or it does some sort of pattern that you can feel by touch to feel if it's sort of feeling right. Once you learn that, you'd be able to do it. I don't want to discourage the visually impaired. I'm sure that there's some guys out there doing it and probably making some really nice prints, because you guys can feel surface blemishes that even the sighted people probably wouldn't notice, right? But I apologize. I mean, I have one blind friend, and I brought up the printing thing with him, and he made it clear to me that he didn't want to have me teach him how to do it. So that closed that door for me as far as being able to directly work with a person and glean from that experience to teach your community. But I wish you luck, and I would say that, if you're maybe legally blind but have some vision, you probably got a pretty good shot at it. And if you're fully blind, depending on how things go and how you can network for finding the models and understanding the software, you might be able to get it going. All right. Okay, so starting to get some questions about some of the new stuff or whatever. All right. Okay, so I don't see any burning questions at the moment.
Without sounding too much like a fanboy for a moment, I am gonna say this about Ben and Creality, that I really think they've stepped up to the plate. They've done a great job on listening to the community, advancing their products by listening to the community, and releasing timely updates and upgrades for their products. And I think at the end of the day, they, to me, at this point, are one of the forefronts in 3D printing.
All right, give me just one more second, Richard. I'm harvesting parts.
Okay. Yeah. So, Ben, you've got a new printer behind you there. What is that?
Oh, because this is the CR5 Pro. I just make a background with the printer. It's not printing yet, but yeah. So it's great joining with Richard and Luke, and also I think this is 3D Jimmy. I just answer his questions. When is the belt printer hitting in the US? We are still, I think, do more time to, I think, improve and polish it. We want to make the best, because I know that not all people ask this printer, so they will still need a bit time to make it a final product. Yeah.
Yeah. So that CR5 looks pretty neat.
It's a nice looking printer.
We haven't worked out the naming convention yet, because I know a lot of people get really frustrated navigating their way through. Like, even when I saw the CR5, I'm like, people are just going to get so confused on the naming because it's the CR5 Pro and whatever. And some people, well, nobody's really going to know, but myself and a few other people within the trade have a private consulting group that we talk with Creality. And these are some of the things that we're sort of trying to slowly work on in the background. I mean, they hear the community and they're listening really well. And we're also trying to act as sort of an interpreter, as it were, for some of the other obscure things that they're not going to find in a survey or something like that, right? Okay.
What upgrade you recommend to the Ender 3? This is coming from Marcos. The first thing, I hate to say it, but the first thing I always say is upgrade the hot end so that you can print more materials. If you want to print with more than just PLA, it is important that you upgrade that hot end. Other than that, what's that?
I'm gonna throw Creality under the bus and supersede you just a little bit, right?
Okay.
So because it's for you, it's probably a normal thing. You just don't even think about it anymore. But I deal with so many people that break the little arms on the plastic extruder. If you're going to do the very first thing you're going to do, get an aluminum-based extruder of some sort. I don't care what brand or whatever. At least an aluminum one. I prefer like the Bondtech BMG style. That's just my preference. The E3D Titan. But get a replacement extruder, and then look also at the hot end. Like he talked about. So let's talk about the hot end a little bit. Okay. So the reason he likes to use the all-metal hot end, because we talked about this in the green room, is that it gives them the flexibility to do higher temperature stuff without worrying about off-gassing from the PTFE, and there's some merits to that, right? I totally agree with that. And if I had like birds in the house, like a friend of mine does, Capricorn has warnings. You take it over about 250, 260 degrees, you're putting your birds in danger, right? Which means there could be something that could affect you. But there's something that the birds are very affected by. And that being said, the reason I'm not huge on the metal thing is I have a thing that I do called the hot end fix that puts a spacer in, captures that last little bit of PTFE, and it can never pull away from the nozzle anymore and create the gap that creates extrusion problems that a lot of people fight with the Crealities. It's reasonably well known now. Nobody's trying to hide it, but it's the way that the manufacturers have chose for a while to do it. There's other manufacturers doing it. I get the other manufacturers set up as much as I can get information for, but I like the ease of, or the smoothness of printing I get with that PTFE line almost all the way to the nozzle. It sort of helps a little bit with retraction being cleaner and stuff that gives an effect that I like. So there's different ways to do this, right? There is no one perfect right way.
You know, like I said at the top of the show, and Brian Baker's making a good point here in the chat, get to know the machine first. And, you know, you wouldn't buy a new car and then take it over to the garage and get them to put a brand new engine in it.
Right.
It's the same thing with your printer. Don't do the same thing with your printer. Just take it home, set it up, play with it, do some prints, then figure out why and how you need to do your upgrades. Or if you're not sure, consult somebody like Luke or myself, and we can certainly help you on an upgrade path that will assist you and get you into printing faster and a lot longer.
Yeah, so in that vein, so I spend an unreasonable amount of time in the Facebook groups helping people, right? Somewhere between 30 and 40 hours a week probably I spend in there because I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. But every day there's people that pre-ordered the aftermarket motherboard and your favorite sensor and bed leveling sensor and all that stuff, and then they go to put it all together, trying to do these upgrades as they assemble it, and it's just a disaster. Get it together at least once. Make sure that all the parts that Creality gave you work, right?
Yep.
Then you can think about doing the other stuff. I don't know. And the other part about this, to get down to brass tacks, not that there's a competition going out there, but I have yet to see somebody who's done all of that other modding stuff get cleaner prints than I can get off of a base Ender 3. It might have the pet string fan duct on it just to get the 360 cooling and an upgraded extruder.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that Pets Fang, because I had that on my Cr-10, and to be perfectly honest with you, I went back to the stock Creality cooling solution because
it's decent, right?
What's that?
It's decent. The only problem I have with their stock one is because it's single-sided, you get the dark side of the moon cooling effect on odd-shaped models, and I just like to have air blowing from both sides. That's my only reason for wanting a Fang at all.
Gotcha. I just think that their stock cooling solution works just fine for all the stuff I do. And, you know, like I'm doing stuff like this, right? So I'm doing some pretty detailed stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not dogging the stock setup.
No.
You can take a stock one and go.
The only thing I wish they would do is get away from those sleeve bearing fans and go to all ball bearing fans. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Because the sleeve bearings wear out quite fast and they're noisy. And if you go to a ball bearing fan, they're just going to last longer. They're a couple cents more than a sleeve bearing.
And don't go to the Noctua fans because they don't move enough air.
That's right.
There's places for those, but not in the hot end. Oh, so one of the things that I got sidetracked on, I think I mentioned at the time there was something I was trying to think of and I couldn't remember. So we were at the bed leveling portion, and that brought up the thought of the assisted, the ABL systems. So some of our printers, some of Creality's printers come with ABL systems, and some don't, and some people add them as an aftermarket. Now, the reason I bring it up is I'm going to tie back to that X-gantry rework. I get people all the time that don't do the X-gantry rework or that bed stabilization, and they can't get their machine stable, and they think that buying a bed leveling system is going to solve the problem, right? Because now it's going to measure it before it starts every time.
Yep.
What happens is now you've added a device that's going to measure it before it starts or however you set it up, but you're still going to have that inconsistency of the nozzle not redressing the bed the same every time it comes back. Those things need to be taken care of. The kinematics need to be working good, or it doesn't matter how expensive of a sensor you get or what its resolution is, it will not correct the problem. So I urge you not to take away from the people selling the aftermarket systems, but I urge you to do that kinematics tuning long before you ever go looking to put one of those on your machine. Now, if you just want to have it on there because it's convenient, that's fine, but make sure it's going to take advantage of the work that you've done and making sure your machine is repeating to begin with.
I agree with you 100%. If you put that machine together correctly the first time, you're never, ever going to need an auto bed leveling system. Now, speaking of that, Creality's done a good job at creating the BL Touch upgrade path for some of their printers. I think they've done a fantastic job on that. The one thing that I would say is that on the printers that are below the CR level, if you're in the Ender family of printers, I would like to see a board that does not have to have a whole bunch of extras in order to be able to put on the BL Touch. I think it should just be a plug and play, just like it is on the CR family of printers, without having to go through all of the nonsense of having to put a bootloader on and all that other nonsense. Because I find a lot of newbies that want to do that because they've been listening to the internet, is they will try and do that and they will just muck up the works, and then they're going, well, nothing works for me.
There is a path. Michael Law's Teaching Tech, he has a thing on adding the BL Touch to a stock board and what it takes to do it. And you can do it on a stock board, but you have to pair out some of the fat on the firmware to do it. And it does involve updating the firmware. I don't know if you can really get around that because the machine can't sense to use one firmware over the other on whether or not the BL Touch is doing the signaling or the action, the mechanical is.
Well, the Creality board for the CR family, all you got to do is basically plug it in and upload the firmware. But with the Ender line of products, you do have to go through a whole bootloading process. And yes, it can. You have to trim the fat a little bit. If you follow the directions that Creality has set out in their guide, then it should be fairly easy. But again, I just like that real quick, plug that cable in and away you go.
All right. Okay, so I haven't seen any new questions coming up. Because we're talking about my guide, that was sort of part of the things. And I don't know how many of the other series of family of printers you work with, but I have some stuff in there for the Ender 5 series that basically covers how to align their vertical rails to each other and to the frame. The update will have more of the aligning to the frame guidance in it. I've learned some stuff since the last thing that can further that and give some ideas on how to make it more adjustable, as it were. Some people are like, make it locked down. I'm more of the let's make it adjustable, give you the tools to know how to adjust it, and we can get it perfectly in line with the frame and the rods in line with each other, which makes for a smoother operation of those type printers. I will say, from my personal experience, I really like the Ender 5 series, the cube styles.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, the kinematics on them are better. We're not flinging the heavy weight of the bed around the machine, so you have way less ghosting from like the Y-axis belt and that kind of stuff. There is some ground to be had on, like, it'd be awesome if they took the base enders and had it set up so they were a dual lead screw drive at least. I'm working on an aftermarket mod to make that pretty easy to do. It might involve a linear rail and adding a Z drive screw on the second side or something like that. But I'm really a big fan of how sturdy they are. They square up really good from the get-go on assembly, and not a whole lot of problems. We have the Ender 5 Plus has a noise filtering problem with some of the PSUs. They got the screw didn't get tightened down tight enough, so the noise cancellation circuit is not working. So I've been having to help some people with that or whatever. But the PSU is working. It just, some of them are having to be opened up and that screw tightened down, which is not something somebody wants to do, but it can be fixed at least.
Well, you know, to Creality's credit, I will say by going to the Meanwell power supplies, it's made a world of difference on the way that power is delivered to that board and then distributed throughout the rest of the printers or rest of the printer. And it sure makes a huge difference in the prints as well.
Oh, so Ben Brady's asking for a metal washer solution for the hot end fix. So I am waiting for things to calm down from the current situation because it's sort of distressed the manufacturing in China. But I am trying to work on if you want to call it, aftermarket solution. I have a couple of vendors that sell aftermarket Creality parts, and one of them is looking into creating an aluminum spacer, as it were, for that mod, and they'll provide the spacer in a kit along with the Thingiverse URL to get your proper length cut guide that you'll print yourself, and there will be a metal washer solution. Because what happens with that plastic washer, I haven't printed it 100%, but even PLA drifts over time, just like solder. You know, you put it in a compression mode and it can drift over time. I don't deny it. I'm still using spacers for up to 6 months without problems, but your mileage might vary. But anyhow, if you can get an aluminum washer put in there and then have that right cut length piece of tubing capturing that tubing, it'll never have problems. The only people I've known of that have problems with the PLA from a mechanical standpoint was I've had a couple of them where they said that it melted in the hot end, and I've been able to source out every one of those. Their hot end fan failed. It was either failing or failed in the upper part of the hot end that it melted the PLA, and there's nothing I can do for that, right? That's out of my control.
Change the fan.
As long as your fan is working right, I legitimately have one machine that has in-use spacer that has 9 months of use on it, and it's not fatiguing to the point where it's not operating properly. But yeah, if you find somebody who's willing to manufacture them or whatever, let me get set up with them. I already got a couple of people that will retail them even on the U.S. side, as long as I can get them produced and made. All right. I'm not getting to see the new comments.
There's a comment here from Brian Gobrecht. I know I probably, or Gobrecht. I probably butchered his name. He says, does the new Ender 3V2 have a new hot end, or is it just a new cover? I think that's directed at Ben.
Okay. So yeah, it's has a new cover, but it's yeah, it's not a different type of hot end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Another design for the cover. Yeah. So.
All right. Yeah, I told Ben before we went on we weren't going to let him get beat up too much on the new printer questions because there's a lot of stuff in the wind on the new printer. Some of those are designs that, and you basically in that thing you got to see the prototypes or the first iterations. The term crowdfunding or whatever has come up on a couple of things, so it didn't translate very well in the show that was on last night for those who saw it. But a couple of those printer models, I think they're only going to happen if the crowdsource meets a certain level and they get the commitment from the community that they want to do them. And I think that's really a smart move on their part. If you don't have the audience out there, why make it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've done some stuff based off of advice from people, not necessarily from myself, but maybe from myself and others, to include everybody. They put out some things that we thought would be really great sellers, and there's such a small percentage of the population that's buying it, they're not really making money on it. A classic case would be the Cr-10 S5. There's so few people that even have the desk space to set one of those up that, I mean, they still make them, they still sell them, they still support them, but they got murdered on that for what their setup costs were and everything, and what it did in the market, right? So I don't know that this is the wave of the future, but we've seen other Snapmaker and other people do these crowdfunded things or whatever. You may be seeing that as a new thing that Creality uses to judge engagement with the market. The good news is they've got the R&D group and enough people, hopefully like myself and other beta testers, to get you a refined product that you're not going to get a pile of garbage out of your Kickstarter crowdfunding thing like you do maybe with some of the other folks, right?
The one thing that I find with these Kickstarters and these crowdsourcing projects is you never know if you're going to get a product in the end. The beauty of dealing with a company that has longevity in the marketplace, like Creality, for instance, is that when they say they're going to put out a new product, they don't go and ask you for your money up front to do the R&D on it. They go ahead, they do the R&D like a traditional company would. Then they get it out there to beta testers, find out where it's lacking and where they can improve, then make a final revision and then put it out on the market. And that's, to me, that is something that Creality shines at over most of their competition. Because I've had printers from companies that just are horribly put together.
Okay. So I personally didn't have an agenda even before we started today. We're coming up on an hour. Would you like to continue on and do some more general discussion, or do you want to sort of wrap things up and call it a night?
I'm good to go as long as you guys need me.
All right. Okay, we'll give it just a minute to see if we get some decent questions rolling in from the audience. So if you got questions, you put them up there, as long as it's not related to the new products and all the bells and whistles they're going to put on the new, whatever, CR6 or the belt feed system. Trust me, I've already had a discussion with Ben about if that belt feed thing becomes a happening deal. I want to be part of that. the endless Z printer.
Brian Baker, let me address this one because I've been following this, and Brian's actually my co-host on our live streams for Saturday night. He says the 12-volt system struggling on the 10S5, and I agree with him on that. It's really pushing the limits of the 350-watt system. He says he upgraded to the 24 600-watt power supply and swapped the hot end and bed out, and it's running great now. And I think
that board, will run at both voltages, won't it?
Yes, it will. Yeah. I think that when you have a product like the Cr-10 S5, you've got something that big, it really needs to have the proper power supply to run it all. And this is what really surprised me when the Ender 3 came out, was because it was 24 volt and the Cr-10 was 12 volt. And it should have been the other way around.
If I could wave my magic wand, all printers going forward will be 24 volt. There's no need to put 12 volt out.
I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah.
You've got
Right.
more headroom on a 24 volt system than you do on a 12 volt system.
Right. So, yeah. Yeah, Vincent, it's tough with people out of work right now. But that being said, just as for somebody who's in the space a lot, all day, every day, right? It has amazed me how many people have entered the printing space just to participate in the plastic printing for the hospitals and stuff for the.
There's been a huge surge, yes.
So I admire those people. Some of them are coming at it the wrong way. I mean, it's great that people who already have printers are doing it. Some of these people never had a printer, and they're like, "This is what I want to do," and we're trying to help them get there, right?
Yeah.
So I've been pretty busy. But
I've been printing headbands here for the face shields on my Cr-10 S, and I'm coming up on 50 pieces now, and I'm doing 3 to a bed, and that's about it. If I had a Cr-10 S5, I'd be doing a heck of a lot more, but I don't.
Somebody's asking about resins and the difference between the Elegoo Mars and those. So I have the LD002R, and as far as
I have one right there.
Yeah, as far as I know, they use the same resins.
Yeah, they do.
You don't have to buy Creality resins. So I think that's what you need to hear specifically is as long as it's for that wavelength that's generated in that machine. Which, what is it? Is it 405 meters? Whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
405 nanometers. Yeah.
So if you have 405 nanometer resin, you can use it from any manufacturer.
I'm using Monicure in mine right now.
I mean, I'd prefer, I represent Creality pretty much. If I'm going to steer you to one, I'd steer you to that. But you've already got one. Use that resin. The 3 has got a bigger vat and a bigger print size. And that's got my interest peaked because I haven't been super happy or super excited about the resin because it's messy. We set up a negative pressure system at my house to use it because personally I don't want any of that chemicals wafting around the house.
Well, here is a print that I did on the 2R. So this print was done in the Monicure Rapid Resin Gray on the LD002R. It's one of the first prints I did. I'm still testing the machine for review that'll be coming up fairly soon. And I got to say, this was done at 50 microns. The detail came out beautiful. It's a little small for my finger, but it came out beautiful. And, with the advent of resin making its way now more mainstream than it ever has been before because the price has significantly come down. I mean, the 2R is half the price of my Wanhao Duplicator 7, retail wise. And to be perfectly honest with you, some of the improvements that they made with the exhaust system and how it's filtered, you very rarely smell any resin at all.
Right. Yeah, for me, it's one that comes out of the vat and whatever. So, but don't get me wrong. I mean, people can deal with that in their own fashion or whatever. It was just the holdup for me, even setting one up, was I wasn't doing it unless I had negative pressure. That was just how I wanted to do business. But, yeah, so we got some questions going on in the background there. Some about cheap nozzles and unclogging them. Do you throw them away? All right, so I'll say my 2 bits about it, and maybe Richard might have a different way of dealing with nozzles. So I very rarely actually wear nozzles out, mainly because I don't do a lot of abrasives. I have a hardened nozzle I use when I test filaments that have abrasive properties. I could use a hardened steel nozzle. So there's a couple of different things we can mention in that vein, but I will say this. If you get a small sample roll of nylon, you can use nylon to do what they call an atomic cold pull, and you just push to extrude nylon at like, I put mine in at like 250 or 260 degrees. I keep pushing on it, turn the heat off until it cools down and it solidifies in there. I let it cool down to room temperature all the way. Then I turn the heat back up, and then that nylon is stretchy, right? So I release the lever, I pull on that nylon, and I load it up with a ton of pressure. And as that temperature hits, usually about the time it hits like 75 degrees C or so, it'll pop loose, and it'll take anything that's stuck to the inside of the nozzle throat or the inside of the PTFE or whatever, and it'll bring it back out with the nylon. So that's how I personally clean them. Because of that, I don't go through a lot of nozzles. Do you have anything that you do different?
I don't really do anything different. If I can't get it out of the nozzle itself because of some other obstruction, what I will do is take the nozzle off and I will throw it into a pot with boiling water, and I will let that material kind of ooze out, clean it up with a brass brush, pop it right back on the machine, and that's the most extreme version. But yeah, I don't go through nozzles either. I haven't changed nozzles on any of my machines probably in about the last 2 years.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about the source code for the CR7. I heard through the grapevine that that's coming. It'll be available. If you're going to find it, it'll be on the Creality website. They have been working diligently for everything to have source code out there. There's not very much that doesn't. So if it doesn't have it now, you'll get it pretty soon. Or you can just basically there's a way to pull the hex out of the machine you've got, and you can basically analyze it and draw it out on your own. I don't know what in there that you really have to have in the source code. All right.
What about acetone on nozzles from Evan?
Acetone's
fine as well. It just, if you're going to use acetone, make sure that you're wearing gloves. Make sure that you're wearing a mask, because the vapors can be harmful to you, and they can leach in through your skin. So, use the proper PPE. If you've got PLA stuck or ABS stuck in there, acetone works great. But if it's something like PLA, just boil it out if you can't get it out any other way.
Mm-hmm. I like the boiling. That sounds pretty non-invasive. There's other guys that do it with a torch or whatever, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like a fun time to me.
Well, no, if you put a torch on it, then you got to hold it. Here, you just drop it into the pot and leave it go for a couple of minutes till you see that material start moving, and it doesn't take long. I mean, PLA melts at a very low temperature, so it doesn't take long. PETG will come out of the nozzle as well if you heat it up in a pot of hot water.
Uh-huh.
ABS will get soft to a certain degree as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can clean any one of those materials out just by throwing it in a pot of hot water. Then I would say don't use that pot for anything else. But, putting in a pot of hot water helps. I see a lot of people talking about filament oilers and this and that, and I've never used a filament oiler in my life. I don't see a need for it. None of my materials seem to get that blocked up. So at the end of the day, if you want to use harsh chemicals to clean your nozzles, go ahead, but just use the proper PPE and make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, so Ben Brady brought up, and I would agree. So they do vapor smoothing with ABS because ABS will melt with acetone. So if you're specifically working with ABS, then it'll clean your nozzles out. But it doesn't act on the PLA and other materials near as aggressively. Yeah. So somebody asked if Creality is retiring any lines as they introduce this new stuff. So I don't have the company memos on that. As far as I know, the only two lines that have been ever discontinued was the Ender 4, because they had so many problems with it. It just needed to be taken back to the bench, and it came back as the Ender 5, which is a great printer, right? And then the Ender 2 is not currently in production. And to be quite honest, there's a market for the Ender 2, and I've been sort of egging them on to consider sort of working with us to clean it up a little bit, but possibly reintroducing the Ender 2 back into the market if it made sense. So no guarantees on that, but I think it could have a place in the market, especially if we can get it down into that. I think if we could get it in at 100 to 100 and a quarter, they'll sell almost as many of those as they do Enders. It might even hurt their Ender business. That's the only reason to think about not doing it, right?
Now, I'm not overly familiar with the two, so does that
Right.
not have a smaller bed?
The bed was, I think, the legit 200 or 200 by 200, I think. And so the deal with the Ender 2 was it had what we would call the left side of the Ender 3. So it had that rail, it had the carriage that rode on it, and the arm that came out, but there was no support out on the far end. Gotcha. Right. So if you got your eccentric adjusted right, and you weren't whipping the bed past the nozzle so much that you pulled sideways on it, you can get some really nice prints out of it, right? But it's not quite as stable as the Ender 3. And once the Ender 3 caught on like wildfire or whatever, there was no real need to make the Ender 2. But anyhow, but it might be, if they want that market share that is even below the Ender 3 entry level, because not everybody can afford a $200+ printer for their first printer.
That's true.
It might be smart of them to offer it. That's something that they'll have to decide.
It's funny when you talk about price, because when people come into the store where I work and they ask me about prices of printers because they're not sure that, they're still thinking they're up in the $1,000 range, and I point them to the Ender 3 and say it's only $349, the eyes get really wide and I get the big gasp. Are you kidding me? It's only that much? It's
so in the US
it's price point great in Canada,
right? So this is how I look at it. And so there's a differential in pricing between Canada, because you're basically $1.50 to the dollar type of thing, sort of. So US, if you buy it off of Amazon, you're in that $220, $240 range or whatever. Or if you order it from overseas and are willing to wait, you can get as low as like 170, right? But you got to wait for 5 or 6 weeks for it to come over. But for a printer of its capabilities, that's not much money, right?
No, not at all.
I mean, I had a ANET A8, the kit that I got it used, right? But that kit, when it sold, was $170 kit, and there's no way that an ANET A8 is ever going to be what an Ender 3 is, and it's almost the same price, right? And they're still selling those stupid things. I don't even know how, but they do. They've now got a V group frame models and some other stuff they're doing or whatever, but there's still some unknowing customers out there that are buying those things thinking that they're getting a good deal because it's a sub $200 printer, right? Not knowing that they're getting a fire hazard that is probably a minimum of 3 years behind the power curve for implementing stuff, right?
The one question I get asked most of the time, and I saw it go by here in the chat as well, is that thermal protection turned on in the firmware? And I can tell you from my experience and looking through that firmware line by line, yes, it is turned on in the firmware. So when you buy a Creality product, you are assured that the thermal protection is turned on.
Yeah, I will caveat that some of the in-stock replacement boards that are out in the system, there are some that might not have gotten the updated firmware, so always check. It's a real simple check. If you want to check that it's working, basically pull the thermistor out of the heat block and tell it to heat. If it doesn't go into alarm in under a minute, it's not active. Just because we have basically, how they talk about new old stock, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Out in the system that might have an issue, and I don't want people to think that they're guaranteed that it's not.
I know here with the company that I deal with here locally, and the company that I work with, we order such a limited amount of the product, so we know we're always getting new stock. And how I knew this was the Ender 3 that I bought 2 weeks prior to a new shipment coming in, had one small change in the new stock from mine, and that was the little brass insert now that is in the extruder. As the filament goes in through the extruder, that wasn't in mine, which I had only purchased 2 weeks before the new stock came in. So like I said earlier, you know, Creality is always trying to improve. They're listening to their audience, they're listening to their customer base, and this just shows like a little change, like that little grommet made a huge difference.
Yeah, they are trying to improve stuff. Like if somebody's gonna, because there are people that will use that plastic extruder until it won't work, right? And adding that brass insert is a way to keep it from wearing, because that was a problem, was the filament with it mounted above, the filament's rubbing on it. Now, me personally, like I have a couple designs on Thingiverse of end-feed rollers that you can print that don't even require bearings that can help get that filament through and not wear it out, right? But not everybody either finds it or is aware of that type of stuff. And, you know,
I just relocate the spool holder to the bottom back of the machine. There's enough room to put it there, and it feeds in just nice. If you do an over-the-top roll, it feeds in just great.
But for most of mine, I have the overhead space, and all of mine already have end-feed rollers printed and whatever, and so I just go with that. But yeah. So yeah, somebody said they just got a 1.1.4 board that doesn't have it. Yeah, that's what I was sort of pointing out. We can definitely say that we're all looking forward to the new offerings that are coming out from Creality.
Absolutely.
Ben and I are coordinating what that looks like, what models I may or may not participate in, so that I can give support for it or whatever. But I'd like to say I get every new model that comes out, but even for them, it's not practical to give me every model if it's not warranted or whatever. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just been testing them as they come into Spool 3D, and you know, I think I've tested everyone that's come in so far. And like I said, I got the 2R in the background here that I've got to finish doing my testing with, and then that'll be a review coming out fairly soon. But so far, I like it. It works well. It's at the right price point, and you know, for the machines that I've worked with in the past, and the ones that, you know, every once in a while somebody will bring a machine in that has to be repaired. The repairs are quick and easy. You don't have to wait too long to do repairs. So,
all right. Well, the questions are really dropping off for productive new topic questions. So I want you, Richard, to go through and sort of tell these people where they can find you, what things you are doing, and the different things. I'm going to restart a print really quick to keep those things, the workers going, and I'll come back and then I'll wrap this thing up. All right.
All right. Well, as you guys already know, my name is Richard Cleveland. I'm the host of The First Layer, which can be found on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook. Come over and join our group. It's entirely free. We also have a website, thefirstlayer.com, which we are now really starting to fill out. You'll be able to find more stuff there very soon. We've got a lot of our videos on Creality products that we've done up on the website, also on our YouTube page as well. Go over, join, have fun. If you need to get a hold of me, you can either get a hold of me through our Facebook group, or you can drop me a line at richard@thefirstlayer.com. If you want to have questions asked during our Saturday night live streams, which we do every Saturday night, myself and my co-host Brian Baker, you can always send those questions to questions@thefirstlayer.com. And we answer those questions live on Saturday nights. We kind of hold on to that pool, and then we answer them for you live Saturday nights. And we also take questions from our live audience as well.
So those that had the stopwatch out, the time I was gone was how long it takes to get the parts off of a flex plate and restart a print. All right. Thank you for coming tonight, Richard.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
For what you do for Creality for us in the media relations and hosting this, giving us a platform to reach out to your users and educate them and enjoy your products.
Yeah. I
don't think we have anything more specifically for topics tonight. So thank you for joining us. If you catch it in the rerun, head to Richard's channel for more content. Hit Facebook if you want to see me. I am getting ready to rebrand my YouTube channel, and I'm going to be doing more stuff there where I'll have very detailed sections of my guide coming out, and I'm also going to do some generality stuff for new Creality users, for Creality specifically, just to make the new user experience a little bit easier, right? So look forward to that. It's going to be a little bit of work for me, so I'm not quite as excited, but it's happening, right?
Yeah.
So take advantage of this time where I'm not traveling and get some more help for the new users out. That's my program. So good night, everybody.
Yeah. So good night, everybody. Be safe.
Good night.
Yeah.